Today's video is sponsored by PDS Debt. The fire, water, and grass types have been at the core of Pokemon's identity from the very start, and sometimes you can't help but go with your favorite even if that means you won't have a shot at the other types until later. And when it comes to missing out on fire, the rarest of the three with more than 40 fewer Pokemon to its name, your choice of starter could leave you with a bad burn. That's why today we are going to do what we do best, taking on our first starter type in our series, seeing just how fast we can get a fire type in every Pokemon game beyond your starter Pokemon. Kicking off our challenge, we need to of course skip our first starter and begin looking at the other options, with Gen 1 featuring a pretty diverse range of fire types. And while all of them are locked until we get through Rock Tunnel, we are then almost immediately faced with the version exclusives Vulpix and Growlithe on Route 8 at 20% rates. Now technically, the only thing forcing our Manipulus run to red is the high Nidorino encounter rate. And while a pure Squirtle run would be quite competitive up to this point, from what I can tell, Nidoking will still be a bit faster and consistent, which locks us into Growlithe as our first fire type. Yellow, however, removes both of these, placing Vulpix in the dreaded game corner and Growlithe all the way over on Cinnabar Island in the Pokemon Mansion. Of course, Yellow does offer us each of the starters along our way, with Charmander being just above Cerulean on Route 24. However, I think we should add any additional gifted starters to our rule. So if for whatever reason that Charmander wasn't there, what would be the next earliest? Well, our only other options earlier are Flareon and the Ponyta line, because it seems like the Pokemon Mansion had to make room for Growlithe, as Ponyta is now found on Bicycle Road. However, that will require us plenty of story progression to get the Pokeflute and wake Snorlax, unlike the other option. Simply grabbing the Eevee still in Celadon and heading right over to the department store for a Firestone to get our first non-starter fire type in Yellow, and if we accept this solution, the first evolution of the challenge. Generation 2 is where things heat up, at least in terms of difficulty, but not options, as none of the new fire types can be encountered until the post-game, except for the legendaries, which is obviously not ideal, aside from Crystal's addition of the Odd Egg from the daycare, providing a 12% chance for Magby, 2% of which is a shiny. Thus, we need to look back at the Gen 1 Mons. Surprisingly, Magmar can be found in the Burn Tower's basement at 5 or 10% for levels 14 or 16 respectively, based on the time of day. An encounter I wasn't even aware of before this, especially funny since it gets moved to Mount Silver in Crystal version. But luckily, we don't have to deal with any of that, as the stone pre-evos can again be found as version exclusives on two sequential routes, 36 and 37, the former of which only requires us to reach Goldenrod for access. Crystal even throws Growlithe onto Route 35 to save us a few steps. And even without those extra steps, the Growlithe encounter will beat out the Odd Egg for Magby even if we get it on our first attempt, since it takes over 13 minutes of biking, meaning we can stick to Crystal but end up with an extra Growlithe already. The Hoenn region though will give us some new options, with Numel and Torkoal as our non-starter fire types. And while both can be found in Fiery Path, Numel can also be seen just before it on Route 112 at an impressive 75% encounter rate. But do we have any prior gen options is the question here. Well, Fiery Path did also hold Slugma, but at the lowest of all three encounters, even if it did matter. Beyond this, none of the prior fire types show back up until Vulpix at Mount Pyre. Thus, we finally get to add a non-Gen 1 fire type to our roster by sticking with the base games, which are ahead of Emerald by just a bit, and reaching Route 112 to catch our Numel. But if you thought those options were limited, we all know where this is going, as Diamond and Pearl are notorious for their fire-type roster, with the regional decks containing literally only the off-limits Chimchar and Ponyta lines. But hey, at least the horse hasn't gotten its own win yet, and it can be found without too much progression. First on Route 206 in the base games, requiring us to simply finish up in Eterna, use Cut, and find the 45% day encounter. Sadly though, even with Platinum's upgrades to the regional decks, adding in Flareon, Houndour, and Magmar, we are still left with another horse, since they graciously let it roam on down to Route 207's grass just above Oreburgh, leaving us two horses for almost the price of one in the not-so-hot Sinnoh region. But at least we didn't have to deal with any more game corners, because ever since our time searching for dragons, I have been left with tons of debt. But luckily, we finally have some support thanks to today's sponsor, PDS Debt. PDS Debt is here to burn away your struggles against debt thanks to their plan of attack, rolling all your high-interest debts from things like medical bills, credit cards, and personal loans into one simple low monthly payment. I know firsthand how much of a headache high interest rates are, and so does PDS Debt, as they will listen to your situation and use that to create plans built around your specific financial situation. Plus, with hundreds of 5-star reviews on Google, a 5-star Trustpilot rating, and an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, not only can you trust their approach, but you can see just how many people they have helped. And PDS doesn't even require a certain credit score to aid in your battle. So if your money is getting burned away by debt, PDS Debt is here for you. All you need to do is head on over to pdsdebt.com to start your free assessment now and find the right solution for you to start blazing a trail to debt-free living. Okay, so luckily, since Fire Red and Leaf Green results in another Growlithe, we don't need to worry about that. Although it's worth noting that since the remakes are carried by Squirtle and Leaf Green's money differences won't matter until after our catch, we could get a Vulpix here by playing Leaf Green if it was necessary. Where things do change are back in Johto though, as in the fairy video, we checked if the Slugma with Flame Body obtainable from Primo's egg could help speed up a Togepi hatch, and while it didn't work out there, here Slugma itself will beat out the returning option in Growlithe on Route 36, finally giving us a Gen 2 winner. Speaking of prior episodes, in the Gen 3 remakes for the Steel Challenge, I actually missed that Horde encounters could offer something new with, of course, Magnemite on Route 110. But this time, there are no Fire-type additions earlier than where we make our expected Numel catch, unless we happen to hit the Horde encounter when going for that Numel. However, it would likely be faster to run in that scenario anyways, and stick with the still solid 60% encounter, leaving just Sinnoh and its Ponyta. Now there is something to discuss, as you might recall that the Grand Underground must be visited before we can leave for our expected target, now a mandatory event. Once down there, the nearest hideaway on our left reveals how BDSP tries to rectify the missing fire types, throwing in a Houndoom here as well as in 5 other hideaways. However, this is only a rare spawn, a 50% chance to occur, but luckily this is quick to reset, simply needing us to walk in and out of the room. Plus, by doing just this at the top entrance, we can see up to 4 spawns every 6 seconds. But the problem still remains that just below the Southern Cycling Road is the near and dear Ponyta, which is accessed a minute after the speedrun leaves the underground introduction. On top of this, Houndoom will always be above our level at this point in the speedrun, and thanks to the updated catch mechanics, even at low HP, our best catch rate is only 11% in the single accessible Dusk Ball and just a 5% otherwise. However, something I almost missed is that we don't actually have to wait until after the main Eterna events to get underground access and can instead grab the Explorer Kit immediately. Not only does this give us back almost 5 minutes before Ponyta, it also means we won't have the second badge, which leaves Houndoom now possible to be at or below our level range. So now with far more time and a catch that is feasible, Houndoom finally provides some fresh fire to the Sinnoh region. Unova brings back the heat, as even with removing prior gen Pokemon in the base games, it hosts 5 new non-legendary fire lines. But somehow, it still ends up being a bit of a joke, since Pansear can be gifted to us early on if we choose Oshawott as our starter, which is a bit harder to argue not counting in terms of ignoring starters thus far, especially since the next closest fire type is just a Pansear catch in Pinwheel Forest, so we will stick with the non-starter gift. Thankfully though, we can also check out the sequels to find what they are cooking up. Although this one is looking to be a little underbaked as well, because just as the tagline of Verbank Complex reads, "Where fire meets steel," we can again resolve our type challenge by heading right there to find one of our most frequent encounters, Growlithe. But X and Y provide a somewhat new situation, as we may need to skip 2 starters, since the professor will force the Kanto ones on us once we reach Lumiose. Perfectly though, the regional bird of Kalos comes with some flair, as once it evolves at just level 17, Fletchinder flexes the fire type. And not only can the bird be caught in the first grass, it is in the medium-slow experience group, which is the second fastest group to reach 17, and can actually attack, unlike Burmy previously. However, this won't quite matter, better, as just after we could catch our bird, we can actually find Unova's elemental monkeys at a 10% rate each, meaning we are ending up with a less free than before but still clear winner in Panseer. Even if Sun and Moon had included the fire type Oricorio on the first island rather than the electric, we still wouldn't have escaped another fire pup, as Growlithe can be found even before the first trial, as soon as we reach the northern half of Route 2 at a solid 20% rate, with only a slightly lower rate in the sequels, leaving us with the base games and far too many Growliths, which of course takes us back to Kanto in Let's Go, and this time Growlithe and Vulpix are added to an even earlier location, Route 5. We do have to consider the single new fire type to this region, Alolan Marowak, being the last of the Alolan trades to be discussed in these challenges, but this time it is much further on over in Fuchsia, leaving us with our... Okay, well there is one other option, as Charmander can be caught in these games as early as Route 3 being a rare spawn, and while we have avoided starters thus far, that was under the pretense of them being gifted to us, and given the number of Growliths we already have, I think it's fair to say that this rare spawn Charmander deserves the win, especially after the Damien situation. So we simply need to book it past Brock, grab the on-location lure, and start hunting for our first starter of the Fire Challenge. While Sword and Shield only add a pair of new fire lines in Karkles and Sizzlepedes, both can actually be found once we finish in Motostoke, with Karkle on Gallarmine's track and Sizzlepede just a bit earlier on Route 3, but only as a 1% hidden encounter, unless of course you use the Flash Fire ability to up that by 50%, which can be found on the Gen 1 version exclusives that are also on Route 3 at 15% as visible encounters. Of course, we have the wild area and DLCs to check before this. In fact, even the closest area possible, the Rolling Fields, has fire mons by simply setting our date for the harsh sunlight condition, those being specifically the version exclusives again. And since the DLCs pose no threat here, we end up with another Growlithe or Vulpix in Galar, leaving us with a better question. Does Hisui fix the fire problems of Sinnoh? And the answer is sort of, because while there aren't any new fire Pokemon added to the games and just the single regional form in Who Else But Growlithe, that can only be found once we reach the third area in the Cobalt Coastlands. The starting area does feature one fire type we couldn't use last time though, as Chimchar and Monferno can be caught as soon as we can cross to the center of the Obsidian Fieldlands, and while rare, they have from 7.6 to 16.5% encounter odds across 4 spawners at night. But Sinnoh's staple fire type in Ponyta can of course be found in the Fieldlands near the well-known Alpha Rapidash. Thus, this Gen 4 inspired game leaves us with an unsurprising result, and our third Ponyta so far. Sadly, Scarlet and Violet's new non-legend options consist of only the Charcadet line, Scovillain, and the Volcarona-inspired Paradox Iron Moth. And with no fire types on Poco Path or in South Prov 1, we have to retread some ground. As in the Dark video, we used a jump skip to get back to the Inlet Grotto and catch a Houndour. However, there is one other option, as our aspiring fire type Fletchling does return on Poco Path, meaning there might be a way for us to once again evolve a regional bird for our challenge. Now, we only have 23 minutes, but in that time we can get a lot done thanks to Gen 9's Let's Go feature, giving us experience a bit quicker and consistently. Plus, we even have a free rare candy to help our chances. But there is one bigger problem here, because even if we can avoid the progression required Houndour, I was made aware after the Dark video that a few spawn points within the Inlet Grotto can seemingly overlap onto Poco Path, leading to a much faster Dark and Fire type, or at least theoretically, because it seems this is a rather rare event, at least if we were to wait around for it, having spent a total of 2 hours at the 2 more known trees where this happens and only finding a single Yungoos. And from my testing, the only reliable way to fully reset the spawns is to loop around, leave Poco Path, and head back for another set of checks. Doing this did lead me to find 1 more Yungoos after 3 minutes of resetting, but was followed by 20 more minutes of nothing, all suggesting this is far too rare to consider the fastest route, which leaves leaves the original question: can we evolve our brave bird faster than the previous hound shortcut? And sadly, it's just not possible this time, as despite the Let's Go mechanic actually being incredibly useful here, the levels and thusly EXP yields here are too low to get us there in time. I was only able to get to around 13 on my first shot, and those last 3 levels require more experience than we have grinded so far anyways, meaning we are getting a returning victor, but luckily this is a hound we haven't exactly seen yet in Hound Hour. So after flare blitzing our way across the finish line after just 9 hours, 56 minutes, and 25 seconds, the fire type burns out to 10th place. And I was always a bit nervous to take on the starter types, given them being a bit easier, but there were still some fun things here that I'm glad I got to check out. But what did you think? Should I take on the other starter types next? I'd love to know that, and what you thought about the video in general below. It definitely gave me some time to work on the Roses follow-up too, and I'm really excited for where I'm at with that. But for now, before I go spoiling too much, thanks again so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and more to come soon.